I'm Mario Thomas. I'm Senior Vice President, Strategy, Partnerships and Programs at Ontario Centres of Excellence and Managing Director of the Centre for Commercialization of Research. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and welcome to Discovery. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the generous support of OMERS, the sponsors of this presentation theater. I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel discussion, Ontario Commercialization Initiatives in Medical Technologies. We'll kick off Discovery in this theater by having the panel discuss recent initiatives, including EXCITE, which stands for Excellence in Clinical Innovation and Technology Evaluation. EXCITE is a clinical innovation. EXCITE is a proposed global Center of Excellence for Medical Technology Evaluation with a goal of attracting companies worldwide. We'll also learn about CImTec, which is a Center for Imaging Technology Commercialization, as well as IBM Watson Research supporting Ontario Innovation. To guide us through the discussion is John Soloninka, who will be your moderator. He came to HTX from his role as healthcare practice lead for IBM Global Business Services in Ontario. John was appointed president and CEO of HTX in July 2010 and is currently a director and advisory board member of the Centre for Imaging Technology and Commercialization, the Ontario Brain Institute, HTX, and Excellence in Clinical Innovation and Technology Evaluation. Welcome, John, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mario. Had I known that my bio was going to be part of this presentation, I think I would have shortened it to about one sentence. So thank you very much, Mario. One of the other reasons that we and the Ontario government and many other governments around the world focus on medical technology is because it turns out that, and who knew, that medtech has some of the highest returns, highest salaries, and highest employment multipliers of any industry. And although the slide is very small for you to see, what it shows on the far left from 1997 to 2007, that green line on the top is actually advanced medical technology, showing that's the highest shareholder return above financial services, above biopharma, above automotive, above aerospace, et cetera, et cetera. And in the bottom right-hand corner is more recent data, again, for IVDs, for diagnostics and others. Those lines up above are those from the medtech area, and the ones below are pharma and Standard & Poor's, or not Standard & Poor's, I beg your pardon, Dow Jones and so on. So it's a very attractive sector, and if you look at Ontario itself, we have about 1,100 medical technology companies, including 22 multinational medical technology companies. We have about the third largest medical research cluster in North America, but we are not nearly close to the top in terms of translation of that into commercialization. And that's one of the reasons that HTX and some of my colleagues' business exists. So the strengths, very large in medical research. We've got a critical mass of $4 billion in sales, 22,000 people, 1,100 companies, and world-class in those areas that you can see there. So many good cluster attributes, but we've got weaknesses as well. And it's really those weaknesses that I want to talk about today, how we're shoring up those weaknesses, filling those gaps, and creating infrastructure that allows this to be one of the best places to do medical technology development in the world. And I'm not smoking something unusual when I say that. One of the challenges and things that we're breaking down, if you look at this idealized map of, say, customers in the upper left there, which is the hospitals, patients, providers, payers, you can see a virtuous loop of going through their ideas and market need and incent researchers to do something, which leads to innovation, then development, commercialization, realization, and it goes in this virtuous loop. Wouldn't that be nice if that's the way it worked? The reality is that there are significant barriers to this. Various of those silos do not talk to each other. They don't even have a mechanism to talk to each other or understand how to articulate their needs to the others. There are also barriers in terms of lack of capital, lack of collaboration amongst partners, lack of even knowledge amongst the partners that various things exist. Notwithstanding this, we still have successes. But let's talk about some of the things that are starting to cut down some of those barriers. So just in summary then, we have many world-class medtech cluster attributes. We have certain weaknesses, especially in terms of ecosystem linkages and engagement, rather than just sales and marketing, but engagement by multinational enterprises in research and development in Ontario. The good news is over the last 10 years, and sitting in the audience here, and myself and others, that there's a committed group from government, industry, and academia who have been realizing ideas for the last 10 years to create some of the organizations that we're going to talk about. So the first one, I've mentioned them here, the Center for Imaging Technology Commercialization, the Ontario Brain Institute, Excite, and tapping into global M&E expertise, GE Pathology Centering of Excellence, and we're very fortunate to have IBM here as well to talk about their innovation by design and their role in healthcare technology, and then where we go from here. So at first, what I would like to do is go to CImTec, the Center for Imaging Technology Commercialization. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Aaron Fenster, the Center Director for CImTec. Dr. Fenster received his PhD from the Department of Medical Physics at the University of Toronto. He's scientist and founding director of the Imaging Research Laboratories at Robarts Research Lab, University of Western Ontario. And runs the graduate program. And rather than going through all the details here, the thing I want to talk to you about, that's most important about Dr. Fenster is, although he is the quintessential and outstanding academic that he is also recognized as one of the leading commercialization centers for medical imaging and has spawned numerous companies. And this center here is just a realization of things that he has been building over many years. So without further ado, Dr. Fenster.
Thank you, John, for very kind words. In the next few minutes, I'd like to describe to you our new center, the Center for Imaging Technology Commercialization, which is one of the federal centers of excellence in commercialization and research. So I'm the center director, and the co-director is Martin Yaffe, who is here in the audience. And the two of us are building the center now, recently funded about 4 months ago. So the question when we had the idea of establishing this new center is why should we do it? What's so special about the imaging community? Is there a capacity? Is there a culture for innovation and translation from universities to the private sector? So we are convinced, and we convinced others, that there really is an enormous opportunity to move a Canadian medical imaging industry forward in a great way. And it is based on our environment. As John mentioned, the community, the medical imaging community, the scientific community is quite extensive in Ontario. There are outstanding investigators whose research is considered internationally as excellent. We have in many of these investigators already spinning off innovations, already patenting patenting innovations out of the laboratories, and have a large cluster of trainees. In fact, in Ontario, there are probably about 250 PhD students focused on medical imaging research and discovery. But the university labs doing excellent research is important, but it, of course, doesn't lead to commercialization and translation. Well, in the imaging community in Ontario has already understood the issues of commercialization and translation to the public, to the private sector. And they're already engaged in the culture of commercialization. And so, in fact, there's quite a substantial track record of commercialization out of our university labs. We have quite a few spin-off companies. Some are still small, some have gone on to be mid-size, and of course, many, many patents. And in addition to that, our laboratories are rich with highly qualified personnel. Our training environment is really outstanding, international renown, and our graduate students, many of them stay in academia, but many go to industry. And in fact, some of our graduate students actually spun off companies. We have a number of successful companies that have been led by our master's and PhD students and have become quite successful. And the last thing is partnerships. We have built, the imaging community is built in partnerships of course, in the clinical sector with physicians, surgeons, and in the private sector, multinationals and domestic companies. So we believe we have the foundation to establish a vibrant medical imaging technology sector in Canada, specifically in Ontario. Just to give an idea of the kind of support we have achieved from granting councils and how much money has already been invested in the medical imaging sector, all that is shown in this table. You can see that the research investigators focusing on imaging discovery have received enormous amount of funding from CIHR, of course, the premier granting agency in Canada, from the Canadian Cancer Society Research Institute, from Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, Ontario Research Foundation. There are 13 Canada researchers in imaging alone. And the Canadian Foundation of Innovation has invested nearly $400 million in infrastructure in Canada in medical imaging, and majority of that money is really in Ontario. So, which means that our laboratories are rich with trainees, outstanding funding for research, and the infrastructure is really among the best in the world. So with that background, with that potential, we're able to successfully launch this new Center for Imaging Technology Commercialization. This is funding through, as I said, the federal initiative of the Centers of Excellence in Commercialization Research. As I said, I'm the director, and Martin Yaffe, so I'm located in London, where the host institution is the University of Western Ontario, and Martin Yaffe is located in Toronto at Sunnybrook. And in our mission in establishing this center is to help Canadian imaging small and medium-sized companies to become successful. I described to you that we already, out of our research laboratories, already spun up many small companies, many startups. Unfortunately, many of them are still embryonic and facing barriers, just like John described. So our mission is to help these small and medium-sized companies to become successful, to move them to the next stage. Our mission also is to accelerate commercialization out of research, out of our research laboratories in the medical imaging sector, and most importantly, to allow them to overcome the barriers that these individuals, as well as small and medium-sized companies, face in becoming successful. So these are the barriers that John described, and I'll describe the barriers specifically that are in the pathway to the medical imaging investigators and SMEs. And so all the barriers cluster around the issue that not every laboratory in a university or not every small company or medium-sized company has all the expertise needed to become successful. Many of them, for example, face a problem of not having access to medical imaging technology, access to imaging facilities such as MRI scanners, CT scanners. These are very expensive instruments, multi-million-dollar instruments that are available in hospitals, of course, but hospitals are busy imaging and diagnosing disease and treating disease. But many of these tools are required to advance discovery, to test a new discovery, to test a new device. And that is not available. However, it is available in some of our research labs, particularly in Toronto and in London. Through the CFI, we've obtained over $200 million in medical imaging equipment alone, such as MRI scanners, CT scanners, and the like. To move a discovery to the next phase requires a clinical trial. And many companies, many investigators don't have the expertise to launch clinical trials. So we will provide that kind of expertise. In terms of the medical imaging facility, our center will provide access to these very advanced imaging technologies in our laboratories and provide expertise in running clinical trials, be able to introduce and engage physicians in participating in trials and to test new concepts. In developing new technology, of course, validation is critical, and that requires often a pathology correlation with an imaging device, a new device. And we will provide that expertise. Half of our center will focus on digital pathology and what's required to use digital pathology or pathological images in 3 dimensions to correlate with medical imaging to validate a new medical imaging technology. And another barrier that many face is regulatory filing. Many new small companies, startup companies, really have little knowledge about the regulatory process and begin to deal with that much too late. I can describe to you my personal experience in doing that in one of my spin-off companies. We only discovered what's the regulatory requirements late, and it cost us quite a bit of time and money to backtrack. And the last one is business executive management. Many of these SMEs lack savvy business advice, and we'll be able to provide executive in residence, or at least linkages to executive in residence mechanisms. Our business goals are then to support external ventures to help grow imaging companies, spin-offs, and move them to the next level and help them to attract new investments. Basically, what we will do is de-risk investment from VCs into these companies by providing some of the services just described. We'll have internal projects to generate our own IP. We'll have very educated staff and very advanced staff to develop digital pathology software or instrumentation for image-guided interventions. And the objective is to be sustainable after 5 years. And to do that, we've established 3 cores: a core dealing with technology development of hardware for commercialization, basically devices and software as required in systems, in new medical imaging systems. And a second core for technology validation. As I described, in developing new technology, it must be validated to establish its value. So we will have a great experience in developing test devices, test phantoms, to be used in MR scanners, CT scanners, ultrasound device systems to validate new technologies. As I described, digital pathology validation and correlating medical imaging devices, new techniques with pathology for definitive establishment of validity of the imaging system, and clinical trial support. And in the third core, the last core, is commercialization aspects. Basically provide management expertise and services in partnership with HTX, OICR, and other agencies, so we can bring together interested parties in moving a technology forward and bring in new investments, basically attract investments into these projects, and by helping to de-risk the investment. And as I described, the regulatory support. This is a critical element that many small SMEs are now asking of us. And so we will provide the expertise for Health Canada, the regulatory process, and provide advice about the FDA process. So I described to you our vision, and before we establish along our pathway, the first thing is to establish what our customers really need. What I described to you is what we perceive they need, but right now we are in the process of carrying out an assessment of needs and impact from our customers. Our customers are SMEs and university investigators focusing on commercialization. So we are now in the process. We've engaged consultants to establish, to identify who our customers are, to identify their needs, to identify what will make them successful, and based on these aspects, we'll be able to hire into the center to fulfill the needs of our customers. So this project is already ongoing. It's almost completed. We'll have the complete report, all aspects of the report in about a month, and then we'll be able to then validate what I just described to you, the so-called barriers that everybody facing, that we believe they face, and mechanisms that we can help us to overcome them. So, we've been asked what we consider success. Of course, we need to be sustainable in about 5 years. So therefore, we need to generate revenues, but also it's critical for us is not to just generate revenue, but to provide a service to the community, to the medical imaging sector. So we believe we should be able to accelerate the growth of small imaging companies to become medium-sized companies that generate a substantial number of jobs in Canada. Help create new companies. We already have investigators coming to us with ideas about spinning off companies, and we are in discussion with them about how to do that and how to help them. Increasing number of jobs in these companies as we help them grow. Attract investments. We believe we'll be able to help these SMEs and startups attract funds, and internally be able to generate new patents and generate revenues from fee-for-service licenses and contracts on the pathway to being sustainable. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Aaron. And could we go back to the HC? Thank you. So CImTec describes a commercialization infrastructure for medical imaging, also related biomarkers, digital pathology, and so on. And it's one of several that are being put in place now that will have a significant impact on the rate of commercialization. And I think those measurements that were mentioned by Dr. Fenster, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. You want to do the reverse. But just to give an example, and it's one of our favorite examples, Cameron Puron, who was in fact a master's student in imaging within that same milieu that Dr. Fenster was talking about, saw an opportunity, and I had it up on the earlier slide, saw an opportunity for high-resolution breast imaging and biopsy guidance in MRI, and went from 6 years from an idea as a master's student through to commercialization and sale, $85 million upfront to a company called Hologic in the States, and $335 million total earnout over time. So, as I like to say, when the other grad students are sitting at the empty chair, or looking at the empty chair there and realizing where that gentleman has gone, they realize that it's possible for them to do it too. And this is the route that makes it simpler, more straightforward, and takes a lot of the risk out of the problem. So I'd like to go into a couple of more examples of infrastructure that's being put together as we speak. And that infrastructure, that the CImTec is an outstanding example of something that is world-class and in many ways unique. So this almost sounds like a joke. What do you get when you put 3 ministries, 2 industry groups, several funding groups, providers, and industry all into one room? It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? But in fact, this is what we've done over the last 6 to 8 months on a ministry-led initiative called Open for Business, which is trying to get the ministries themselves to solve their own problems through better collaboration with industry. And in this particular case, it's talking about the medtech industry, medtech research, and the Ministry of Health or related fields, and with the goal of not only solving the problem, but creating jobs. So one of the key outcomes, and you can see this document on the Ministry of Economic Development Trade site, or a number of different, the Ontario government site, is to create this thing called Excite, the Excellence in Clinical Innovation and Technical Excellence. These are long words, and these are, for those who are unfamiliar, I apologize in advance, but pre-market healthcare technology assessment and comparative effectiveness review in the pre-market space versus post-market, and I'll show you why that is valuable and why it's important. But one of the things it needed government involved in is that it will give privileged access to highly valuable technologies, or those with great potential, to not only solve the problems of the Ministry of Health, but also to go global because of its capabilities. And one of the challenges that the Ministry of Health faces, for example, is that they have an unsustainable cost curve. If we grow healthcare costs at their current rate, that plus education at its current value would consume 100% of dollars in about 5 or 6 years, which is clearly unsustainable. And one of the problems with this unsustainable cost curve is on the left-hand side you can see 3 generations of different technologies being introduced. And because in healthcare it's the pattern that you tend not to declassify or decommission the old technology, but you tend to keep it around, and in fact you start using it in combinations with the new technology, that actually doesn't make medical sense in many cases. It's not sensible use of technology. And there is a very sensible way of analyzing how this technology should be used and how it could be incented to be introduced. And that's the one on the right-hand side, which shows that as the new technologies are introduced, they are used in their highest value areas, and those older technologies are decommissioned. So this is part of smart introduction of technology, but you have to go through a lot of analysis to figure out the answer to that question that I've just shown there. This is a bit of a busy graph, but on the left-hand side, what it shows is the life cycle of a technology from an idea through venture capital, through small to medium-sized enterprises, clinical trials, regulatory review, up through payer approval for reimbursement, and doing this loop. It's a very interactive loop. What's happening to that loop, which has been in place for, I don't know, 15, 20 years or so, is that they're starting to impose new things. So for example, not only do I have to prove my device is safe and effective to the regulatory people, I then have to go through another process which says not only that, it's better for the, of all the other technologies that are available on the marketplace, and not only that, better at an absolute level in terms of whether society should pay for it. And that's called comparative effectiveness review or healthcare technology assessment. Now the interesting thing is every country in the world is getting on the bandwagon in this, which they should, and every single one of them is doing it in the post-market space. In other words, once the thing's on the market and could be sold, we're now putting another barrier in front of companies to prevent them to get to market. What we're doing in Canada is unique, and we're looking to move it pre-market. So instead of doing it after the fact, once you've already invested and developed the technology, when you've got a good idea, let's try and map it onto the needs of the marketplace. So for example, let's take the healthcare system and do something that they're not used to doing, which is defining their needs in a way that is understandable by the innovation community. Let's link it to the innovation community, expose it, publish it to the innovation community. Let's in fact select candidates that are highly disruptive technologies that have a very high likelihood of solving one of the highest priority problems of the health system. Then let's use these excellent tools, world-class tools that we've developed in Ontario for healthcare technology assessment and comparative effectiveness review. Let's do that pre-market so that we have time to optimize those technologies. And then if we do get a technology that looks like it's going to knock it out of the park, then let's buy it, let's use it, let's put it in place in the Ontario marketplace. So this is the process that we're putting in place, the so-called Excite. And the beauty of it is you can talk to any multinational corporation in the world, describe what I just described to them, and they'll say, where do I sign up? And this will attract multinational enterprises who are currently spending tens of millions of dollars each every year on exactly this all across the globe and getting not the results that they need. So we're very, very optimistic that this, and it already has, drawn companies to Ontario. And one of the companies, so that's the Excite initiative, which is going to be quite a draw. Another initiative, which is infrastructure related, is the Ontario Brain Institute. So one of the barriers that I described earlier is that the people who have the problems don't talk to the innovators and don't talk to the people commercializing. And we do a lot of, you saw the number of dollars that are being spent on the infrastructure for research in imaging. What about the commercialization in imaging? Well, the Ontario Brain Institute is a great opportunity to focus. Dalton McGuinty there announced this in November of last year, and Joe Rotman on the far right-hand side of that diagram has been tasked with, from day one, getting multiple multinational and small to medium-sized enterprise companies to put their cash on the table, to match cash on the table from government sources, specifically for commercialization in neuroscience. And as I've shown there, in diagnostic imaging and probes, in prosthetics and devices, in brain fitness and training, and in each case with a 3 to 7 year window on commercialization, others going from concept to product. So this is another example of where we're creating world-class infrastructure, and we do have world-class neuroscience in Ontario, and I do mean world-class, better than anything in North America and one of the best in the world, focused on commercialization. Another one, I mentioned attracting multinationals. The fellow on the far left there, Peter Robertson, the general manager of General Electric Healthcare, said, Canada is a small market. It's about 1% to 2% of our global market. So from that point of view, we don't really care if we win Ontario from a sale, or Canada from a sales point of view. But what you can do, as I've just been describing, is you can do outstanding science, outstanding field evaluation, a hell of a lot faster and a hell of a lot cheaper than you do it in the rest of the world. And so GE is extremely interested in Ontario. They also know Dr. Fenster and the others extremely well, and know that we have a huge amount of assets here to commercialize. So we, HTX, invested $2.25 million along with another $15 million from GE and other sources to create a global center of excellence in pathology imaging and computer-assisted diagnosis. This is an outstanding infrastructure that is going to create product, test it, and then be able to sell it worldwide from inside Ontario. And there's going to be a lot of collaboration between it as a platform and CImTec as well, I might add. So GE is one example. I have many other examples from the multinationals. Another company I'd like to introduce and put my cards on the table, I was 5 years with IBM as well, and Don and I worked together on a number of research and development projects while at IBM. But the reason I wanted to include IBM is for two reasons. One is they are perhaps the best innovator in the world. And I mean that unreservedly, and they do it by design. The second thing is not many people know how deeply they are in healthcare. Just so you know, they ran an outstanding session on Monday on brain science. Who knew that IBM was one of the leaders in brain science? But they are. So I wanted Don to come and talk to you about an innovative company and how they're viewing the infrastructure and the link between research and commercialization. And I'll leave it to Don. Don asked me to keep his bio very short, so how about zero other than what I've given you? So Don Aldridge.
It's actually reaching for the clicker, but anyway, thank you, John. The bio really is very short. I mean, you get someone like Dr. Fenster, you know, it's multiple pages. In my case, it's, you know, graduated from Queens, worked at IBM, and then the rest of it still be filled in. Either I'll die at my desk or they'll fire me. Yeah. There is no chance of retirement with IBM these days. It doesn't work that way. Ah, there we are. We're up. And I didn't realize there were two of these things, so I stole one on them. In any case, let me take a few seconds, because while everybody will tell you that they know what IBM is, when I poll an audience this size, there's always a few folks that say, oh yeah, you're the guys that make laptop computers or PCs, or you're a hardware company. And the truth is, we got out of the PC business 6 years ago. Hardware is something that we still do, I'll confess to that. It represents maybe 5% of our profit. We are, if you look at our profit numbers, we're a software and services company. That's what we do, that's where the money comes from. If the hardware went away tomorrow, it wouldn't be the end of the world. We're a fairly large company, about 400,000 people worldwide. More importantly, about 25,000 of those are here in Ontario, or sorry, in Canada, about half of those in Ontario. From an Ontario perspective, we have about 4,500 people in research and development. Again, well-kept secret. It's primarily, well, it's not primarily, it is exclusively in the software world. It's about 50-50 split between Ottawa and Toronto, although we do have a software development lab in London, Ontario as well. So we're a good, innovative company in the Ontario sense. And I won't go through the whole thing other than to say we hit 100 years old this June. So we've been having an annual or a full year of partying with that, to the extent that you do party when you're in IBM, on your own time, in other words. And then probably the most important thing is the bottom there, where it's a little sort of a happy face with this thing, Watson. I don't know, again, I'll do a survey. Have anybody heard of a Watson? You know, Jeopardy? I've got a few people. I did a tour of the Maritimes a couple of weeks ago and was surprised. 1 in 4 people had actually heard of it. It turns out 1 in 5 of them actually had TVs. So that was their excuse. That was a positive comment, by the way, not a negative. But yeah, so we played Jeopardy a little while ago and had some fun with that. I'll come back to that, because I'd like to only take a few minutes, and I only want to cover 2 examples. And one of them is, Watson. It's a little more important than just Jeopardy. Okay. Research-wise, Again, another well-kept secret. About 1% of our population, so about 3,500 people, constitute our research division, to be separated from our scientific community or our development group, which is probably 10 times that size. But we've got 9 research labs around the world now. And it used to only be 8, and it was 8 for the longest time. We just opened one in Brazil. It's the only one that doesn't actually have a picture of the lab because we haven't built it yet, but the process has started. In terms of innovation, again, a fairly long history, most of it in the, well, all of it, all in the technology world. But, you know, we've got little things. I mean, we own the original patents on LASIK surgery. Who would have realized that? You know, the original patents on the Da Vinci robotic surgical systems, you know, those sorts of things. Along the way, we've picked up 3 Nobel Prizes, 5 laureates in that area, and a few other things. Fractal geometry was invented by IBM, and Fortran, as you might expect, which, believe it or not, 52 or 3 years later, people still use. So that's about it for that. So Watson. This is not just a great big database lookup system, and it certainly wasn't connected to the internet, but we had the pleasure of playing 2 games, 2-game total points in Jeopardy against the 2 top champions they'd ever had. And again, it really wasn't meant to be purely a promotional stunt, although it turned out to be great advertising. The question is, what do you do with something like that can actually go out and ask questions? In this case, it answered questions, but the system is designed to ask questions and to deal with unstructured data. So by that I mean, you know, where was Albert Einstein born? Well, in a structured, you know, relational database sort of world, you know, you've got A. Einstein, and he was born in, and I'm going to mispronounce it because it's got a great big accent on it, but you know. But in conventional life, you're going to get, you know, a phrase like, you know, one day, you know, from among, you know, from, how does it say? Amongst his city views of Ulm, Otto, you know, etc. You can pull out of that, you know, where he was born, but it's not exactly obvious to a computer. Let me take an 8-word sentence. I never said she stole all my money. Depending upon which one of those 8 words you put the emphasis on, you will have 8 completely different meanings. Now, I'll let you try it on your own. I won't go through it, but you know, that's not something that computers are typically good at. So again, we're trying to bridge that gap and make these things just a little bit smarter. So we're basically looking at the healthcare industry as our very first area to take something like a Watson system. Now, clearly, we're not going to end up putting a $15 or $20 million computer in every doctor's pocket. Although, if you follow technology curves, it will be about this size in 10 years and cost $200. I mean, that's just how the technology keeps going, which makes you wonder how you stay in this business and make money at it. But we've been working now for about the last 9 months with the folks from Columbia University and their medical school. And it may be that the Dean of Medicine was being very kind, but he was presenting in front of a group of stock traders in Toronto, American City, right? New York. Again, those of you who actually saw Watson will realize that Toronto is an American city as far as Watson's concerned. It kind of blew that question in Final Jeopardy, but we got over it. Although there are 11 Torontos in the United States, as it turns out, and Toronto is the home of the Blue Jays, and the Blue Jays are a part of the American League, so that's the connection. It's tenuous, but that's what the excuse was anyway. But it turns out to be quite good at doing medical diagnostics. And so the Dean of Medicine gave it a challenge of a problem that he had taken about 6 months to actually resolve when he was, you know, relatively new in his profession. Took Watson 3 minutes. Went back and forth with about 4 or 5 questions, narrowed it down, and came back and said, this was, you know, I don't know what the answer was. It wasn't Ebola or something real obvious, but came down with the answer. And I thought, it's kind of neat. So we're working on it still. The people on staff doing this are, in fact, physicians. Marty Cohn is our guy behind this. He's still a practicing emergency room physician on weekends, 30 years of experience in that area. That's the class of people that we pull into these. Let me move quickly to another example, and this one's closer to home. This is a project that we call a first-of-a-kind project, or a FOAK. Everything in IBM is a TLA, otherwise known as a 3-letter acronym, even the company name, except for folks, of course. We're going to have to come up with a new acronym for that. But this is a partnership where the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, IBM, and the Hospital for Sick Children got together. And basically what we're looking at is a new process of treating data, streaming data. And because it's quite different. In traditional database world, you collect data, put it in a database, and then you analyze it. And you might do that, a nanosecond later, you might do it a year later. In the streaming data world, you're producing copious quantities of data, analyzing it. Maybe you store it, maybe you don't, but nonetheless, you do it on the fly. So this project focuses on the neonatal intensive care unit, and I'll show you a few other slides later. But let me start with a quick 32-second TV commercial. I'm very proud of this, by the way, because this is my project. I've been working on it for about 3 years. And this commercial, which you may have seen, you may not, but is played in 160 countries around the world. It's been dubbed into I don't know how many languages. And as it turns out, our chairman of the company cites this as his favorite commercial. So he has no idea who I am, but he knows about the commercial. So
this is a baby. A baby generating data in a neonatal ward. Every heartbeat, every breath, every anomaly, from over 1,000 pieces of unique information per second, helping doctors find new ways to detect life-threatening infections up to 24 hours sooner. On a smarter planet, analyze the data and you can predict what will happen faster. So you can do what they're doing in Toronto and build a smarter hospital. Let's build a smarter planet.
Okay, so that looks actually a heck of a lot better on the monitor we've got here. Whoops, we've gone too, well, okay. You went ahead on me. I didn't do that. So let me just go back here. That's what they look like on TV. And this kid, and they auditioned about 16 or 18 kids to get this commercial done. They're very careful about picking every single word, and they undercommitted like you wouldn't believe. So this is an absolutely healthy child. Whoops, wrong way, sorry. User error. That's what they look like in real life. If you haven't seen them, they're small. Sometimes as much as 450 grams sounds big, but you convert that into imperial, that's a pound. 3/4 pounders, or 4/4 pounders, I guess, if you do the math. But you can see a hand coming on the side there. It's about the size of the kid. There's instruments all over the place here. Whoops, let me just skip through most of this because we're running out of time here. That's basically what they look like. The baby is buried inside this plastic container on the left there under the blanket. There are devices everywhere. Let me show you a little bit bigger picture of it. Same picture, just larger. 1,000 bits a second of information isn't accurate. It's more like about 18,000 because there's about 18 instruments. And what we're basically doing is saying, look, there's an awful lot of transient data there. Looking at this picture, can you tell what the #1 data collection device is in this picture? Anybody? $1,000? No. Okay, not at all. Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's inside that circle. Okay, that's a clipboard. So about once an hour, a nurse comes by and writes down a bunch of, and I've been there and seen this, they write down a bunch of numbers, look at the kid, yeah, he's looking good, he's a little bit jaundiced, whatever, make some notes and continue on. There has to be a little bit of information that's being missed there. I mean, you've got all of this data coming in, and the other tricky part is that various streams actually interact with each other. So when we talk about being able to look for, in this particular case, nosocomial infections, which is the $2 word for saying something you acquired at the hospital, so sepsis is an example. By the way, sepsis, once they detect it, okay, it's about a 40% fatality rate. And that's not factoring in then what's the long-term impact on the child after that. But about 40% of the time they die. If you can detect it, the ad said 24 hours, we're actually seeing more like 48 hours in advance of when the doctors would normally see it. You can treat it. It's a couple of it's drugs. It's simple drugs, some antibiotics. And it's a huge impact. So forget for the fact that you're actually saving lives with this. It's saving piles and piles of money. This doesn't require a system like Watson. This runs on a laptop computer. In fact, 2 babies are handled by 1 laptop. So it's relatively, it's the software that matters here. By the way, that software is supported here in the Toronto Software Lab. So we're proud of that. Anyway, I won't go into much more on this. I think the next slide says thank you, and, well, if it didn't, it should have. But thank you.
So just to close before we go into some questions, I know that we, because we were late coming out of that main room, I believe we started late. So instead of finishing at 3:30, and someone over there correct me if I'm wrong, but we still have 13 minutes left to go? Yeah, we do, good. Okay, so let me just close with a couple of final remarks and then go to some questions and questions from the audience. One of the things, so we've talked about good things, barriers that are being brought down, connections that are being made across silos, but there are still some weaknesses, and one of them is capital. And here's some data. On the left, upper left is the precipitous drop of the availability of venture capital across industry. On the upper right is the same thing for life sciences, that's in North America, and in the bottom is Canadian life sciences. And it's just as bad in the United States in proportion, but they have a larger absolute number than we do, so they're still not dying. There still is some money. Now, things are turning around, but it's been pretty dismal. One of the things that we do badly here is we are the second most frequent creator or investor in companies. The second. There's the U.S., followed by us. The problem is we're 23rd in terms of the amount of money invested in any one company. So in other words, we're funding a whole bunch of little companies that don't have much of a chance of success. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. And one of the reasons that we were created, we're not enough of the solution, but HTX was created. In this particular graph, it shows from left to right, the early stages of research and development, then commercialization, then Series A, then off-to-market growth. And you can see that green, where the blue is funding sources, the green is gaps. And we're there to try and help fund, but we're not enough. And so one of the next innovations that we're going to have to do is and I don't believe it's venture capital getting back to where it was before, it's actually going to be different. It's going to be a combination of social capital, venture philanthropy, government where government makes sense, and it doesn't make sense everywhere, but it does make sense somewhere, and corporate venture capital and regular venture capital. But that's something that we need to work on, and it's in process. But what I'd like to do is stop the formal part of the presentation and just have some Q&A. If you have any questions for the group, there are microphones in the center there. But I would just like to start off the Q&A, and I'll just sit down. And can you hear me? Yeah. So a first question. Oh, actually, we have a question from the audience. It's on.
Test? Okay. Question for John. So, from your portfolio of HTX clients, successful licensing agreements or with like St. Jude's.
Yeah.
Talk about this big gap on capital. But what are you doing? It's better for product definition, when you're breaking the prototype, if you're aligning with one of these Fortune 500, and B, that is your capital. So if you don't have the actual capital, like what you're saying, there's a gap in Canada on angel and VC, then, how much of your efforts then are focused on, at the end of the day, what really matters is the end customer and developing the relationships with them on the product development.
Sure. The question for those who didn't hear because of the microphone, if I got the question right, is of the companies that we've assisted, how many of those or have those had, number one, successful exits by themselves, or number two, successful relationships with large multinationals? And essentially multinationals in some ways become the customer for some of the early stage companies, as well as the end user customer, and therefore the multinationals in some ways define the product, and if they define the product well and are enthusiastic, they can in fact be the capital. And that is true. So to answer your question, Sentinel was one that we funded the clinical trials for, purchased by Hologic, which is a very large multinational. Yeah. So, and there are a number of others that have done exits, that have done, and in fact, you can get our annual reports and some of our other articles to look at companies that have in fact received capital. The challenge is, GE, for example, just to pick one and not to pick on them, they're one of our best collaborators.
but they're an example of a company that tends to invest in Series B or Series B or later, once the company has, number one, proven itself, and also that it's got enough data to show that it makes sense, etc. So that's one of the things that Excite is going to be able to do, is help those companies show data earlier so that they can demonstrate their comparative effectiveness and de-risk the company and make them more attractive. Other multinationals, such as Becton Dickinson, who we also talk with, they invest anywhere from, and this is not better or worse, it's just a different business model, they invest from idea to prototype to pre-regulatory, post-regulatory, and Series A. So it depends on the company. But you're absolutely right. It's critical for us to get the MNEs in Ontario aware of the research that's being done and aware of the SMEs and exposed to them. And this is something we've had very good success at, is in fact creating that community and showing SMEs to the MNEs, and in doing so attracting either corporate venture capital or attracting other forms of venture capital. So it's a very good question, and we're trying to do exactly that. Sorry? No, I can get you the numbers later. By all means, contact. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if I had to guess, I'd say there are probably 5 or 6 that have had exits, more than that have serious financing, and so on. You have to understand also the program that I just mentioned, believe it or not, has been going since April of last year. So it hasn't been going for a long time, and yet we've had tremendous success in terms of the matching from private sector, the investment of the attraction of capital in private sector, and job creation and things of that nature. So, but by all means, contact me later, and I can put you in touch with them. Yeah, okay. Any other questions? So I have a question for Aaron. We've been talking about this idea of a postdoc or a grad student who's thinking about commercialization. We're doing some improvements, but is Ontario the place to do it, or would you recommend going to San Francisco, or what are your thoughts on that?
Ontario.
So Don?
Yeah, I firmly believe that Ontario is the place to do it in the imaging sector. As I described, our culture is already in place for commercialization in our research laboratories. We already, as you mentioned, empty chairs of students who have left and have become entrepreneurs. You mentioned on one, Cameron Puron, but there are others also who spun off companies and have become successful. Others have joined companies. So now the culture in our research labs is that the pathway for a PhD or postdoc is not only in academia, but many of them now begin to look at the private sector for just finding jobs and advancing technology and knowledge in companies, but in fact spin off their own companies. So in the numbers in Ontario is quite significant. We are internationally known for the excellence of our educational program in medical imaging and innovation. So I firmly believe that Ontario is the place. We have companies coming from all over the world recruiting our students. Many of the multinationals are aligned with us, are actually investing in our labs so they have access to our students and postdocs.
Thank you. And, excuse me, and Dawn, IBM has such a deliberate process of innovation. You're to use a GE term, a boundaryless company in terms of where innovation comes from. But I understand that healthcare is one of the areas that IBM corporately sees as a major investment area. So 2 questions. Why do you think that is for IBM, that healthcare is important? And number 2, is it possible to do innovation within IBM in Canada, not more so, but as much as anywhere else in the world?
Okay. Are we...
I guess use this one.
No, I think this one's working too, right?
Okay.
Are we coming through?
Yep. Okay,
good. So, if I can recall the question there, the real answer for the first one, well, there's 2 parts of it. I mean, part of it is, why are we interested in healthcare? We in fact do live here. I mean, we benefit from it as well. But probably the more accurate business answer is it's a huge growth market. I mean, as you pointed out, it's going to be a 70+% of the provincial government spend, and that's the same, by the way, everywhere. It's just absolutely huge market for us. So, you know, clearly we're going to be attracted to that. On an international level, I mean, we're all aging as well. So that's just, you know, growth, right? Yeah. The other half of the question, sorry, had to do with, you know, are we interested in basically setting up and working here? And I think the answer is yes. We're currently looking for opportunities to do just that. I mentioned earlier that we've got, you know, quite a development effort in Ontario. And I've certainly have been trying for a while to see what we can do about getting the research side of that moved here to some extent. It's a matter of picking your battles, and I would think that the healthcare industry is one that would make the most sense for us to tackle first. So we're not there yet, but who knows?
Okay, very good. Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, that's fine. I know that we started a little bit late, but what I'll do is I'll end a little bit more than the time I have allotted here so that you can try and get back on schedule a little bit. I'd like to thank our speakers for their presentations and participation, and I'd like to thank OCE for inviting us to participate in this. And I would encourage any of you who have further follow-on questions, by all means, contact us through the information here. And there's an awful lot more of the story that can be told beyond what you've seen presented here, and it's a very exciting story. So, thank you.
Thank you, John, for moderating this panel. I want to thank Watson, Don, and Aaron. This was an excellent discussion. I'd like to offer you a small token of our appreciation for taking time off, out of your busy schedule. So it's blueprint to your next $1 billion.
Yes. Since I made the first one.
You got to make the first one.
Thank you very much.